the big test is you have a business of today or a profession of today or a country of today. And you have to operate that successfully in the short term, because if you can't run and pay the rent and pay salaries, well, then you don't have a business or a profession. But the big question is to ask yourself, what will the future be? And then to ask yourself, what will my business or my profession or my country need to be successful in that future? So it's to imagine the future, imagine your ideal business or profession or country in that future, and then to ask yourself, how did I get there? Write down the journey from 2021 through to this successful, exciting, relevant future.
Hey listeners, excited for the next episode? So am I. Post the pandemic era, the world is a different place. Trying to make sense of this? Absolutely, we all need to. I'm very fortunate to have a futurist join us and help make sense of the current situation and future trends. Joining me from South Africa is the renowned futurist, globally acclaimed speaker, and business strategist, Anton Musgrave. Anton, what a pleasure to have you on Inspire Someone today.
Srikant, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you.
How are you? How are things back at home in South Africa?
Well, I'm glad you're asking me that question this week because, and not last week, things this week have quietened down. The country last week had incredible looting and riots sparked by ex-president being put in prison for contempt of court. And the country was a scary place, actually. But what's fascinating is when things go really crazy, then also good things happen. And we've seen phenomenal community response, collaboration amongst different parts of different communities to resist the rioting and the looting and help stabilize the whole country very quickly. And this week's been pretty peaceful. The rebuilding and cleanup has started in earnest.
That's wonderful. It's very impressive to see how humanity comes together when there is crisis.
It's wonderful. And in fact, I think that behavioral pattern of humanity is what will save humanity in the world that we'll talk about. That's changing dramatically.
Yes, the world we are going to talk about. I think even before we get into that, Anton, for the benefit of all the listeners, let's start off with what is this futurist all about?
Well, let me respond by saying one thing it's not about, and it's not about predicting the future. As a futurist and a business strategist, I believe that my role is about inviting conversations, challenging, curious conversations about possible futures. And it's about understanding what are the waves of change that are shaping the future. Of course, exactly how the future pans out is dependent on each one of our responses to what's happening today. So the futurist is less about saying this is a future and more about exploring possible futures and then helping businesses and people think about which future you would choose. Because the future you choose results in you taking different steps and decisions tomorrow and the next day. And those decisions collectively actually shape the future that eventually arrives.
Okay, so that's what the futurist is all about. And again, you from your own background, you are a lawyer, then you turned out to be a futurist, right? For somebody who is keenly watching this particular space, A, how did this happen to Anton? And B, what skills one need to possess to be a futurist?
So how it happened to me, Srikant, is a funny story, actually. You know, I'm very scared of two things in life. One is a snake and one is a dentist. I regard them both as equally scary. And many years ago, back in 1989, I was in a dentist surgery awaiting a tooth repair, very nervous, very worried, and I needed to be distracted. I picked up a science magazine and I found an article on an academic platform for sharing information. And they were talking about the internet in 1989, and I knew nothing about it. I asked a few friends and some of my law firm partners, did anyone know about this thing called the internet way back then? And they'd never heard of it. And it gave me such a fright because I said to myself, what else is out there that I don't know about that might shape the future? Because if this story in the science magazine about this internet and this academic platform for sharing knowledge is true, it will change the whole world. And I guess that leads me then to the essential characteristic, if you like, or skill of a futurist. And it's simply curiosity. It's a willingness to spend time exploring the things that you would not normally talk about or read about. And then having the ability to press pause and say, what does this mean for me, my family, my business, etc.? So curiosity, number one, and then an ability to, with an open mind, without frameworks or blinkers or constraint, actually imagine possible outcomes, possible consequences, and of course, possible choices.
Taking that line of thinking, is it fair to assume that Newton was one of the preeminent futurists way back then, that he had the curiosity to know what is going to happen and came up with his own thought process?
Exactly right. And if you think about, Alvin Toffler, who was one of those preeminent futurists from way back, when he spoke about the world we're living in today, if you think about Arthur C. Clarke, who imagined in 1965, he imagined a world where you could make a phone call to somebody without knowing where in the world they were physically.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was unthinkable, right? Because in 1965, we had to make phone calls through a physical manual switchboard where you literally plugged and unplugged cables into the switchboard to connect people. But you had to know where the person receiving the call was physically located. And he imagined a world. What he did was he said, look, we're beginning to experiment with satellites. We're beginning to experiment with different forms of transmission of data. And he put two and two together and imagined over the horizon what that might be. And then he spoke about a world of mobile phones, basically, 40, 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
That's one of the elements of being a futurist, is kind of seeing those kind of trends and predicting those kind of trends of the possible future outcome.
Exactly correct.
So you did mention about curiosity as being one of the skill. But if somebody were to make this as a career, are there schools that kind of gives this kind of a trait? Or what do you recommend for people to kind of do in order to pursue a career to be a futurist?
I think there are two directions that you can follow. The one is a more structured, almost academic direction, if you like. And there are institutes, I know, at some universities. So in South Africa, there's the Institute for Futures Studies. There's the Institute for Futures Research. And they will teach you methodologies, if you like, on, how to look at technology, look at shifts in society, etc., put them in a bundle or a framework and give you some process. That's the one route. And that's not the route that I followed. I followed a much more practical, pragmatic, and business-oriented route, where after my law degree, I did an MBA, and I then did some studies after that in sort of general areas. But really, I pursued and I read incredibly widely. And I actually made the time as I'm reading to press pause and ask the so what question. And then to start building as I'm reading, I build slides in PowerPoint or any medium, doesn't really matter. But I build slides with some of the facts I'm reading about, some of the interesting stories I'm reading about, but also the potential consequence for business. And so I started out really doing keynotes at conferences on interesting subjects. And that led me through 3 or 4 professional careers to a point where today all I do is work with leaders across industries around the world, exploring possible business futures. And it's interesting because one of the features that I sell when I talk to potential clients is I'm not an academic. I'm a business practitioner. I've built companies. I've closed companies down. I've hired people, fired people, etc. But I will bring you my futurist insights and make them very practical from a business perspective.
That's so wonderful. I think that leads me to the next question related to futurist. Did the futurist community see this pandemic coming?
The answer to that is yes and no. It's no because it wasn't widely spoken about specifically as a pandemic that will start in December 2019 in China. I mean, I have to laugh because December 2019, I was in China. I was in Beijing for 10 days doing some work with some financial institutions. So I was totally unaware of what was happening on the streets of Beijing. Luckily, I was very busy, so I didn't socialize too much, which maybe saved me. So one answer is no. The reason I say yes also is that for a long time now, maybe 4 or 5 years even, I've been talking about, and other futurists have been talking about, a world of potential pandemics in a world where humans have become almost immune to antibiotics because we use them so much. And the question I remember asking 4 or 5 years ago was, what happens to a world where we have become immune to antibiotics and a pandemic arrives? So the possibility of a pandemic has been on the books for a long time. The planet is stressed. We're leading incredibly stressed lives as humans in quite busy, noisy environments of people density and so forth. And health, if you look at levels of obesity, levels of global fitness, etc., the signals, the data points were there for something to happen in the health space. As humans started encroaching in natural environments, we overfishing the seas, we polluting the oceans, we burning down forests, we in Asia eating strange animals. These are all unnatural things. And somewhere something had to happen. So if you remember the SARS flu in Hong Kong way back and so forth, that was just a small data point again that the pressure is building towards a big health event. Did we foresee, did we predict COVID-19? I don't believe anyone really did predict that at that time. But the prospect of a big global health challenge absolutely has been on the radar screen.
That's very interesting. I think that kind of leads into, we always keep talking about the VUCA world pre-pandemic, right? And in fact, as a matter of fact, VUCA phrase, I heard it from you the very first time, probably about 10 years back.
That's right.
We are talking about the VUCA world pre-pandemic and today's world where you're trying to give change, where everything is constantly changing, right?
Yeah.
So what do you see as the new trends that's going to come up post the pandemic?
Look, we can talk about that in quite a bit of detail. I think the first observation is post-COVID, we have to add an E to the word VUCA, and the new word is now e-VUCA, because we are entering an exponential world. So the world is becoming exponential in many dimensions, exponentially fast, exponentially technological, exponentially full of opportunities as well. At the same time, it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and of course, the A is ambiguous. So exponential, I think, is one of those key post-COVID issues which businesses have to grapple with. They will become exponentially threatened by new competitors or new disruptions if they're not prepared for them. The flip side of that is there's exponential opportunity available to companies to really grow phenomenally quickly, way quicker than in the old, more linear world pre-COVID, if you like. So that's one, I think, huge feature. Things like quality, for example, used to be a big differentiator, if you were a manufacturer or a product seller, etc. But rapidly, quality is becoming commoditized, right? Because we don't make very many bad things at the moment. Speed is becoming a commodity because of technology. Everything's speeding up. So now we have automation, we have AI, we have machine learning, we have very powerful computers. One of these days we'll have quantum computers. And so the ability to process transactions very quickly in real time virtually means that everything gets faster. So if you're not fast soon, you will be out of business. I think at the same time, linked to those two is this notion that the world of business, from production in a factory right through the supply chain to point of end use, the world is becoming much smarter. So if you imagine a world by 2030 where every single thing that is manufactured has a data transmitting sensor embedded in it, receiving information about the state of the object and what's happening around it. But that sensor is collaborating in real time with other sensors of other objects in a factory, for example, or in a production line, or in society, or in a city, like a smart city concept, where humans will also have data embedded sensors in their bodies. We right now in 2021, we talk about wearables, but we're beginning to talk about ingestables, which means you ingest, you swallow a little sensor that observes your health from inside. So my body sensors will talk to the sensors in my fridge, will talk to the sensors on my health app, will talk to my insurance app, etc., etc. And if you can imagine all of these systems integrated and interdependent, helping us live better lives. So smart society, smart health, smart education, smart business. A very big feature of this future next 10 years is the shift from stupid world, stupid cities where traffic lights are not calibrated based on traffic flows at peak periods, to smart cities where they are calibrated automatically with no human intervention. I think another big force that shapes the future is as we allow, and I think we should allow, robots and AI and technology to do what it's best at, as we allow more of that, there will be a threat to many human activities, many jobs. So we have to, as leaders, reimagine how to make humans relevant in the system of life. And I call that the fifth industrial revolution, which needs to be about rehumanizing humans. How do we imagine the role of an ideal human in a smart world where machines do a lot of the heavy lifting? So what's the value proposition in a service offering by a business or an experience offering by a business? What role do humans play? And how do we develop the skills and the business models around that to enable humans to stay relevant and valuable? And then coupled with that, and a consequence of that, is another big force that's shaping the future. And that is the realization that capitalism, as we practice it today, may not be fit for purpose in the future. Of course, we still need to reward entrepreneurship, the people that take risk, the people that innovate, the people that provide capital, the people that create innovation and so forth. But how we do that at the same time as giving 8 billion people a reasonable hope that tomorrow will be better than today, that's the big question. And I think we have to completely reimagine the economic model of life in a community or a society. I mean, think about this, Srikanth. If old people live in an old age home and they're surrounded mostly by old people, they get older much quicker. And as they're getting older, they're getting slower, they get ill, they get diseases, they get frail, and they need more and more healthcare provided by the state or the government. That's expensive. Now, there are experiments at the moment in some countries where they give young people a free university education if they live in a community with old people and they spend 1 hour a day reading a story to an old person or taking them for a walk in the garden. Because the calculation, the economic calculation is these old people get less sick when they're exposed to young people. This healthcare saving is more than the university fees. Now, in the old Wall Street version of capitalism, that is not recognized or built into the equation of GDP, right? How do we reimagine the role of humans in this new society in a new way? Major issue facing us as people that will live in the next 30 years.
No, profound paradigm shift there. The future of possibilities and the future of big paradigm shifts.
Absolutely. We need to think beyond the definitions that we've always used in business. I mean, one of my favorites, and I'm sure you'll remember this, take this concept of sustainability. I really hate it because companies say we want sustainable businesses, sustainable business models, blah, blah, blah. And what do? They do a whole bunch of good stuff, right? They plant trees and they give meals to poor people in rural countries, whatever it is. But at the same time, those big multinationals are pumping toxic waste into the air or into the rivers. They add the two together and they come out at net zero or close to net zero. And they think that is sustainability. We need to think beyond that. We need to change the language. So let's not use the word sustainable. I mean, in a marriage, a sustainable marriage feels like on average, it's kind of close to zero, right? You just survive. But if you use the word flourishing, if a company says we want to build a flourishing business model, have flourishing relationships with communities around us, then they can't do the bad stuff. And so we need to reimagine many of the words we use in business.
Super perspective, from sustenance to flourishing.
Yep.
So given this as a backdrop, Anton, if this is what the future most likely going to shape, what are some of the businesses or sectors to watch out for from your lens?
Well, let's just take the big issues facing the world. I mean, Singularity University have a competition every now and again for entrepreneurs with business ideas. And one of the rules is your business idea needs to change the life of 1 billion people. Otherwise you don't qualify. So think about what the problems are that billions of people are facing. First and foremost, I think we're facing a big challenge in the relevance of educational systems across the world. What are the skills that we are giving our young children to equip them for the world of 2030 and beyond? And these go way beyond the traditional syllabus you will find in most schools and universities in the world. So there's a big educational challenge. And the challenge is not the building of more schools and employing more teachers. It's a fundamental rethink of the pedagogy and how we distribute education and make it deeply personal. So if you have a classroom of 30 kids, some are going to be quicker than others. How do you calibrate each child's learning journey based on their personal growth and development, not on the average of a class of 30 kids? And then what do you put in the learning experiences? So I think that is one of the biggest challenges facing the planet for the longer term. And if you look at a country like Rwanda in Africa, one of the things that they've done to go from a country of poverty and warfare into the biggest success story on the continent, education was at the foundation of that. And then I think that there is food security. I think, there's more than enough food on the planet for 9 billion people, because every day more people die of obesity than from hunger. It's the politics of food and the distribution of food that is the issue. And so how do we use technology to reimagine food in the world? Coupled with that, I think, is financial inclusion. How do we provide access to financial solutions for everyone on the planet, the billions of unbanked, if you like, and the billions of people that are paying unreasonable fees to some of the traditional incumbents? How do we reimagine that? And then I think the next big thing probably is the environment. How do we reimagine a planet of 9 billion happy people living in a way where the planet flourishes with 9 billion people living happy, fulfilling, relevant lives on the planet? And those are just some of the big areas. So, there's almost an opportunity, Shrikant, in all of the old industries, if you like, but not doing it the old way, reimagining the business model. So what did I say? Education, healthcare, environment, energy, water, food. Those are the big things that we're challenged with right now. In all of those areas, they're old ways of doing it, and they will all die and become irrelevant, and they're completely new ways. Another really big, exciting area when you think of the future is the lessons we take when industries converge and intersect. So how do we take the lessons from, for example, the tourism industry and apply some of the learnings in the healthcare space or in the education space? And that's a very exciting area of business opportunity, is the intersection of industries.
So the reimagining of the planet is also the interdependence of the planet.
Absolutely correct. This is the only planet we've got, and Jeff Bezos spent an awful lot of money going to the edge of space for 11 minutes. I don't see any of us living there for a long time.
Well, interesting you made that point. That was something I wanted to ask you next, was in the whole realm of the future, where do you see space tourism, more particularly because this is top of the mind with Bezos and Branson taking this flight? What does this mean to the world?
Difficult to estimate right now. And I've been following some of the social media commentary with interest. People are saying, well, why couldn't you feed, 10,000 people with the cost of your rocket? Which of course is valid, if you take a very short-term, very practical approach, I suppose. But let me ask, you this question. Where would the world be if the Wright brothers, many decades ago, hadn't tried their first aircraft? And so it's difficult today to say what's the relevance of 2 billionaires going to the edge of space. No practical immediate value. But what might this lead to in the future is the interesting question. Now, I'll give you something crazy to think about. Some tests have proved, some research has suggested at least, that there are more rare earth minerals in one asteroid than on the whole of planet Earth. Now, what's one of the scarcities in the world of resources? It's rare earth minerals. So imagine if the world's next most successful mining company is SpaceX, who fly up in a rocket, grab an asteroid and bring it back, and we've got more rare earth minerals than we've ever thought were in existence, right? Now, we couldn't do that if, Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk hadn't poured billions into space research. So it's difficult to see the practical value for you and me as ordinary citizens right now. But again, let's just go back to the Wright brothers. You and I would never have met Srikant if I hadn't flown to India in a Boeing or an Airbus, right?
Absolutely true.
And that comes from crazy guys flying an aircraft. If people had said to the Wright brothers, don't spend money building this crazy aeroplane, feed poor people rather, you and I would never have met.
So we'll start what is called as a power of three round.
All right, let's do it.
So this is power of three round. So we have Anton continuing the power of three round. The first question, 3 best places in the world for scuba diving.
Definitely Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Sodwana in South Africa.
Okay. 3 best courses you have played golf on.
Royal St. Andrews. Royal St. Andrews, definitely. I would say the Royal Bangkok Golf Course and my own course in Cape Town, the Royal Golf Club in Cape Town.
Great going. Keep it up. 3 routines Anton does come what may.
Brush my teeth, read something crazy, and enjoy a good single malt after a long, hard day.
3 business leaders to watch out for.
I'm not sure I like him a lot, but I admire him immensely is Elon Musk because he thinks just so differently across so many industries. I think Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, I think she has shown us so many features of modern leadership that are just unbelievable. And then any one of the young people, boys and girls that you read about on social media and international television that are fighting for causes which they really believe in. And I see them as important because they're a proxy for 3 billion young people on the planet who are ambitious and challenge us older folk about how we've messed up the world.
That's great. My last question under the power of 3 round. 3 startups that has great promise.
3 startups with great promise. This is really, really interesting. So one coming out of Ethiopia is a startup in the world of converting waste into energy. And they now have the world's largest waste to energy plant in Ethiopia. Again, remind ourselves that Ethiopia was a country of famine not very many years ago. Another one is a company in America called Wonder, W-N-D-Y-R. It's a startup in the world of work productivity, but their purpose is to reimagine the world of work so that humans are happy and relevant in the workplace. And I think that's going to be a fascinating growth area in the future. And then I think the third one would be a company called IoTNXT.com. It's all about Internet of Things. And it's, again, a startup coming out of Africa that has solved one of the biggest problems in the world of Internet of Things, which is, again, connecting objects through sensors. And what they've solved is the interoperability between different communication protocols in different kinds of sensors. Because a sensor built by this tech company and doesn't speak the same language as a sensor built by another tech company. And the language that a video camera speaks is not the same language as a heat sensor, for example. And they've created a platform where all of these sensors with all of their communication protocols can speak a common language and be connected quickly and efficiently. And I think they're going to rewrite the world of business rules.
Oh, how wonderful. I think I can make an exclusive segment of the startups to watch out for with you in the next version of it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So that takes me to the next section of our conversation, Anton, which is, I think in the world that we are in, that we have spoke, reimagining the future, how future will be a lot more different than what the current state is. What would be your word of advice for three categories of people: people in business, for professionals, and for leaders, to stay ahead and to stay relevant?
I think the fundamental lesson, Srikant, that applies to all three really is, how do you build a business or a professional service or a country, if you're a leader, a political leader, for example, that is relevant in the future marketplace? And how do you then bring that insight back into the present? So it's the ability as a business, for example, to imagine who your customers are in the future. How do they live? What do they need? And what will they pay you a premium for? And then to start building the foundations today for delivering on those questions into the future. And it doesn't happen on, a certain date. It's a slow, sometimes a quick process, actually, as you arrive at that moment. For a professional, and I'm here, I guess we're talking about, my daughter, for example, recently qualified as a chartered accountant in London. And I've said to her, it's potentially the most useless investment I've ever made, this education of yours, because a lot of what auditors do will become replaced by smart systems, artificial intelligence. But the ability to think about context, the ability to ask probing questions, the ability to understand context will be what sets her apart and makes her relevant as a chartered accountant. So professionals need to ask themselves this question: what business are you actually in? And a chartered accountant is not in the business of verifying your balance sheet. A lawyer is not in the business of cutting and pasting clauses to put a contract together. A lawyer is in the business of understanding the client problem and addressing that through multiple ways and coming up with a pragmatic, affordable, relevant solution. The machines at this stage, AI won't do that very well, but an AI will put together a standard contract in a second with no spelling errors, right? So if you're a healthcare professional, if you're an architect, if you're a lawyer, if you're a finance professional, ask yourself, what is the essence of your value proposition, and how do you stay relevant in bringing the solutions to the marketplace? How do you leverage the power of computers and smart systems to do that more humanly and more relevantly? I think for political leaders, if you like, leaders of countries, the question to ask is, what will the definition of a successful country be in the future? And one of the governments that I've worked with have said happiness. And interestingly, 3 weeks after our sessions, the government appointed a minister of happiness. They didn't know what it meant. And the question was, how do we define happiness? How do we measure happiness? And then, of course, how do we create happiness for a country? And it's not dissimilar to a business. What does a excited customer look like? And so you have to imagine the world in 2030. How do you attract the right skillful people to your country? How do people in your country live together? Why would they pay tax happily? Well, it's because you spend the tax properly on the right things, efficiently, with no corruption, etc., etc. So the questions are similar across your three domains, if you like, but maybe they're nuances that I've tried to highlight.
That's wonderful. And great perspectives for each category of people to look into, but fundamentally getting to know what is relevant for the role that they are playing.
Absolutely, Srikant. The big test is, you have a business of today, or a profession of today, or a country of today, and you have to operate that successfully in the short term, because if you can't run and pay the rent and pay salaries, well, then you don't have a business or a profession. But the big question is to ask yourself, what will the future be? And then to ask yourself, what will my business or my profession or my country need to be successful in that future? So it's to imagine the future, imagine your ideal business or profession or country in that future, and then to ask yourself, how did I get there? Write down the journey from 2021 through to this successful, exciting, relevant future. And the answers to that question become your strategic roadmap that you achieve. What did I achieve in this year? What did I achieve next year? What did I achieve the year after, as I successfully completed the journey from the present into this exciting, new, and very different future?
Oh, that was very elegantly put, Anton. Thank you. And you also represent a wonderful organization called Futureworld. Maybe for the benefit of all the listeners, a word or two about what Futureworld is all about.
Well, Srikant, thank you for that small opportunity. We're an international business that really works with leaders across industries all around the world, helping them ask the question about what it is we need to do today to create future relevance. And all of that ends up with us working with these teams to help them build game-changing new future-relevant businesses and solving today's problems with opportunities that create platforms for future growth. And we do that with a wonderful team of excited, young, curious people that are unrelenting in their passion for making the future a better place for every business, every customer, and every one of 8 billion people on the planet.
Well, very envious of the role that you're performing, Anton. That is fun stuff. That is exciting stuff. Wish you and your troop a wonderful road ahead as well.
Thank you, Srikant. I really appreciate the time. Great chatting to you. And my final message to every listener is to simply say, let every one of us do something so that your future ends up being a matter of your choice. Don't leave it just to chance. We can change and shape our ideal futures. Have fun doing it, folks. Think differently and stay positive.
Think different, stay positive. Wonderful. Anton, thank you so much for taking time. It was a pleasure having a conversation with you as always, and enriching my listeners with this future reimagined concept that you laid to us. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you, Srikant. Great pleasure, great honor, and look forward to meeting you out there somewhere in the future again.
Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us. If you like what you listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @InspireSomeoneTodayPodcast for all the latest updates. This is Srikant, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.